Good afternoon, everybody. Perhaps good morning, depending on where you live in this fine country. Welcome in to Monday Night Football edition of Establish the Show. I am Gary Hartman, joined as always, back from vacation with the family, the one, the only, the great Cody Main. Cody, how you doing?
I'm good. It feels good to be back. It feels good to have finally met you in person. We've done so many shows together. We finally got to meet up in New York. A little bit of a weird mid-season vacation, which is not common in this business, but it did feel good to get away. I'm recharged. And really enjoyed the Showdown action over the weekend, and really excited to wrap it up here with Chargers Jets, which I actually think is a pretty interesting slate.
I agree with that. And yeah, we were talking about that when we met up as well. Like, most people really can't take vacations in the middle of the season, but you are in a little bit of a unique position where you're running our niche product, which means you're doing XFL, you're doing preseason, you run the golf stuff too. So it's like, there's never really a good time for you. So it's like, why not get in where you fit in? Glad that you had a good trip. I want to apologize to everyone for us not having a show on Thursday. I think that was like the first Thursday or Monday one that we've missed in a long time. That was due to me. I had a death in the family. So I apologize for that. And also, if you're a subscriber, apologize for the lack of content on my end over the weekend, no leverage column, etc. But I'll be back this week, and we'll be here obviously tonight and Thursday night, and should be back to our normal schedule. All right, Cody, let's dive right in. It's a fun one, I think, even though it's only like a 39.5. Chargers road favorites, I believe. This game's in New Jersey tonight, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And let's start with the quarterback position. Two very different quarterbacks from a talent level. But the $2,000 in price, I also think, makes things interesting. And then also, when you talk about matchup, right, the Chargers have been a great matchup to attack through there. So in my mind, Zach Wilson's interesting at 8.8. Herbert seems appropriately priced at 11.8. How are you looking at these two quarterbacks tonight?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it is kind of the tale of two matchups, and styles do make fights. We know that. I think that, I still very much prefer Justin Herbert straight up. The salary matters a little bit. The ownership will eventually matter a little bit. And just how you want to attack the slate will ultimately decide how you have to handle the quarterback position. I think just starting out from a cash game perspective, everyone that's listened to the show to this point has read my content, knows that I am very much a proponent of quarterbacks in cash if and when possible. I think that makes that's the case tonight with Justin Herbert for sure. I think we have just enough salary relief to make the 11.8 price tag on him work, alongside one of the studs that we'll get to in a second here from the Chargers side, being Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. I don't feel the same way about Zach Wilson. I think that being priced at 8.8, where he's right near Garrett Wilson, who's going to be a vast majority of this team's offensive pass game production, and not separating too much from price and from Breece Hall, I think you can get away without playing Zach Wilson in cash game contests and feel pretty good about your lineup. But if someone flipped over Zach Wilson, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think most of my interest in the Jets quarterback tonight is going to be as a flex option in lineups where I'm rostering either multiple Jets pass catchers at flex, or a Jets pass catcher, mostly Garrett Wilson, at captain. I just don't think I would get there in cash game contest given the price tags on the other guys. But this offense has been much less one-dimensional than we kind of thought they would be, or they were really after Aaron Rodgers went down. It was the story was kind of written on how to handle the Jets offense, given how frequently they wanted to run the ball. They've been a little bit more neutral in terms of their pass rate recently, right around league average in terms of pass rate over expectation. But 3 of their last 4 games, they have posted a 6% or higher pass rate over expectation. And Zach Wilson hasn't been terrible. I think they can get away with passing the ball a little bit more. And certainly the Chargers defense is allowing teams to throw against them. They're facing the league's 4th highest situation neutral pass rate, or the Chargers secondary. So I do think this is, a fairly decent spot for Zach Wilson in this Jets passing game. The way that I mostly want to attack it is with Garrett Wilson, who we'll talk about in a second, who I think could be primed for just a massive eruption spot on Monday night. But the way that I think I'm handling the quarterback position as a whole is just mostly as a flex play for both of these guys. Justin Herbert, A-OK in cash, but I don't think I'm going to get too much of these guys at captain because of the attractiveness of some of the skill position players on the slate.
Yeah, very hard to argue with that logic. And like, I look at Zach Wilson's price and captain ownership, and that intrigues me. But then every single time my thought process is going to come back around to, well, then don't I just want Garrett Wilson there? And we'll talk that through. I mean, maybe that's a leverage spot and you shouldn't rule it out. Herbert, I think even more so, I'm less interested in with the 10% captain ownership, the tough matchup. That's a little bit even less attractive to me. Cody, I'm obviously a little bit off my game because I forgot to talk some macro stuff with you before we dive. So before we dive into position by position, I think the quarterback primer was a good one. But anything stand out to you from a 10,000-foot view on this slate or construction-wise?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit with just the matchup related stuff. The Jets, obviously, we'll talk in detail plenty when we get to the skill position on how they're treating and how they're handling and defending wide receivers, both in the slot and on the perimeter. And of course, the Chargers are dealing with some injuries as well there. But I think just the way that these teams project to play, you have a Chargers offense that wants to throw the ball, but they're going to be facing a Jets defense that obviously has an elite secondary and is kind of just allowing teams to run against them a little bit more. So I think that is one interesting angle. What if the Chargers just come out and are a little bit more run centric than we would maybe expect? And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, what if the Jets are just a little bit more pass centric than we would expect with Zach Wilson under center against a Chargers defense that is being thrown on quite frequently? So I think that's pretty interesting. And really, as we get into it, you have the Chargers who are favored, 3.5-point favorites. They have the more attractive quarterback. I think, although you can make a case for Brees and Garrett, I think they have the more attractive stud options on the slate in Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen. And then with Joshua Palmer and Big Mike obviously still out, they've got a lot of salary relief. So I think these numbers here on 4-2, 4 Chargers, 2 Jets, 5 Chargers, 1 Jet is really going to get inflated in small field tournaments. I think you could see the 4-2 stuff push up closer to 40%, maybe the 5-1 stuff push up closer to 20%, as I think what a majority of the field is going to try and do, fit in one of Eckler, Keenan, fit in Justin Herbert, take the salary relief with Quentin Johnston, who we'll talk about in a second, maybe find another player in there. Maybe it's the Chargers D, maybe it's the kicker, maybe it's one of these really cheap guys, and then go back to the other side for somebody like Brees or Garrett Wilson. Yeah. I think that's going to be super common construction tonight. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but if you're playing into that type of build, just know it's going to be met with a lot of ownership.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, and it makes me want to kind of go a little bit more Jets heavy on the contrarian side of things. If I were to be doing a lot of lineups tonight, we don't talk too much about like our sides and feelings on lines here, but especially if you can get it with the hook, I'm very into the Jets plus 3.5 tonight. I don't trust Brandon Staley at all in this game. You know, this is West traveling East. The Jets seem to find themselves in every game. They still have an elite defense. Like, I just picture the Chargers charging and winning this game by like 3 if they win. And you capture that hook. So I definitely like the Jets side of things from a gambling perspective. If I like that, I probably like getting at least a little bit differentiated from the field, who's going to go very heavy on the Charger side. Okay, back to position stuff. Running back tonight. To me, this is a very attractive running back showdown slate with 2 dual threat running backs who have good matchups on both sides, who usage, especially on the Hall front, is really trending in the right direction. Eckler, your most expensive player on the slate, and you get it, right? We've seen the ceilings on Eckler like crazy. If you go back and or go take a look at Evan's matchups column, he kind of breaks down how susceptible the Jets have been to pass catching running backs particularly. And I think that makes things interesting for Eckler. I know last time the Chargers were on a showdown slate, I kind of poo-pooed Keenan Allen, and he was good, not great. I think he was optimal, but didn't hit a massive ceiling, but it doesn't make a difference. I don't actually feel as strongly this time around if I'm choosing between those two, because although it's a tough matchup for Keenan, you get the salary savings from Eckler. Plus, I think he'll get away from Sauce and probably Reed enough where, you know, there could be some goodness there, but I still, you know, put a gun to my head. I prefer Eckler in this spot.
And I think I feel the same way. If you ask me to choose for cash game contests, because I think you will have to, unless you just decide to play both Eckler and Allen and leave Herbert out of lineups, which I probably would advise against, just given the ability to capture the entire Chargers passing attack through Herbert. This is going to be the toughest 1v1 on the slate. And, you know, this isn't exactly one position group, but if I knew the outcomes of, you know, 2 players on the slate, it would be Eckler and Allen. I think that would go a long way in trying to decide. This is where playing 20 max, 150 max will make you at least feel a little bit more comfortable, because you can have positions on both of these guys. But I think I'm with you. If I was playing just one lineup tonight, I would prefer to have Austin Eckler over Keenan Allen. I know Allen's going to avoid Sauce and DJ Reed. We'll talk about that in a second, but I think this is an awesome spot for Austin Eckler, and to see his target total inflated by a Jets pass defense that is inflating targets to the running back position. They're leading the league in target share to Eckler's position at 26.7%. That's like way north of second closest. So I think there's like one of those classic 10 target type games in Eckler's bag tonight. I think that's where most of his bread is going to be buttered. It's still a pretty good rushing matchup for Austin Eckler, and certainly if they jump out to a little bit of a lead as Vegas is projecting them to do, then you can get there on the rushing stuff as well. But I think this mostly comes down to being a great spot via the air for Austin Eckler, and I love the dual threat upside that he possesses. I think this could be a really awesome spot for him.
And we just saw it. I mean, even if the Jets are successful in stopping him between the tackles, like the Bears were in the Week 8 matchup, he was 2 yards a carry, I think, on 15 attempts. However, he got there because he was 7 for 94 and a touchdown through the air. And like that is not only is that in the range of outcomes, like I think it's likely that we get something like that out of Eckler tonight. So even at 12K, say he has a little bit more success on the ground, I could see him paying off that tag. So, everything about Eckler there, price, projection, ownership seems pretty efficient to me. And, if you wanted to take either side of that ownership number, 18% captain, I wouldn't blame you. But have no issues if you want to invest in it.
Agreed.
Yeah. Breece Hall. Breece Hall looks great, man. And it's always an interesting thing with the people coming off the ACLs. If they need a full year to kind of get back to who they are. We saw that with Saquon a couple years ago. He really needed a full year. But then there's like some freaks like Adrian Peterson, who was like running up a mountain like 6 months after surgery or whatever. And Breece Hall seems to be, look, and we saw it at the beginning, right? Like week 1, he's such a naturally good runner that he like had those couple of great runs, but he still didn't have that breakaway speed. I think he's getting that breakaway speed back, and he's starting to look more like the dominant, explosive Breece Hall that we were seeing was on his way to Rookie of the Year last year. 10-4, you get 1,600 less than Austin Eckler. I like this matchup for Breece. I like most of the Jets offensive players in this game, but man, hard to not like Breece Hall in this spot personally.
Yeah, and I think the spot for Breece Hall is part of the reason why I feel okay getting away from going Zach Wilson in cash game contests. You can either get up to Breece if you've got the money, the $1,600, or Garrett Wilson, who again we'll talk about in a second. But these are these spots that we kind of dream of for Showdown, where matchup meets opportunity, meets talent, and it's a decent price tag. It's a fair ownership projection on him. I think he's going to be a little bit under-owned at captain relative to how often he finds his way into winning lineups. And I think it's a great spot to attack. I love Breece tonight. I think as a short home underdog, they're going to try to establish it a little bit. But even if they don't, this is still another good spot for him to get going as a pass catcher as well. He's handled 67% of the team's rushing attempts over the last 3 games. He's added a 17% target share. He's still going to lose some of those long down and distance and 2-minute snaps to Michael Carter. We know that. So some of the obvious pass down work he is going to lose. But this is another good spot against the Chargers defense. That's allowing the league's 8th highest target share to opposing running back. So another good spot for a big passing game role from Breece Hall. I love it. I love the spot for Breece. And I think I'm with you in saying that if you want to project this game to, not just play a little bit closer than maybe people are expecting, but if the Jets go out and win this thing outright, even could be a massive, massive spot for Breece Hall. And I think that getting over that 12% at captain specifically is a great way to handle this spot.
I'll take this question because it's an interesting situation that both teams have an elite running back and receiver on the slate tonight, and kind of how you correlate those guys are intriguing. Sorry, wrong one. I do want to take Noah's question as well. But Patrick's question here: should we devalue Keenan and Eckler and flex when one is captain? Feel like they take opportunities through the air away from each other. I completely agree with you. From a ceiling perspective, they definitely do. So maybe if you're looking at a cash lineup, et cetera, I wouldn't make rules like that. In tournaments, though, I'd be totally fine putting a dock on one when one is in the captain from the Chargers side. And I want your take on that 1 second. I don't have the data on the Hall Wilson thing. These are 2 second-year players. Like, it's not the same type of situation, but I think it's going to be so concentrated to those 2, and it probably will be on the Chargers side as well. But I for some reason, I have less of an issue or concern with getting those 2 guys in my lineup together, even when one is captain, than I do for the Chargers. Maybe that's just a gut feeling for me, but curious your thought on both sides for Wilson, Hall, and Eckler, Keenan.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I'm definitely okay with having Keenan in lineups where I've got captain Austin Eckler. I'm definitely okay with having them at flex, but the way that I would handle it is the way that you described it. I would dock them slightly. I don't want to have, let's say I've got 10 10 captain Eckler teams, I don't want to have Keenan in like 50% of those. I don't want to have Keenan in 5 or 6 of those. So I would dock it, especially if you're having a 150 set. I would want to have some exposure to the other guys that are the expensive guys, Brees, Garrett Wilson in those lineups. I would want to have some exposure to Justin Herbert. If I think Eckler has a big receiving game, Herbert is obviously going to be carried along with that as well. Price and ownership definitely matters there. So like these guys on the Charger side are 12K and 11.6 respectively. Yep. Those are massive tags to have to pay off, specifically when you need one of them to be the optimal captain. Right. On the other side, however, Brees Hall 10.4, still a big tag. I'm forgetting the Garrett Wilson price tag. I think 9.6, but those tags are a little bit more palatable, and you can get away with, if you get like the 20 to 25 from Brees and still you get like high teens, low 20s from Garrett Wilson, which I think is firmly within his range. You're okay with those. Like if you got those games from the price tags on Eckler and Keenan, it's a little bit more difficult to make those work in certain lineups. But because of the discount, I think it's a-okay to have Brees and Garrett Wilson in the same lineup, even when one of them's a captain. So I would not be docking those two. It would just be a kind of a slight dock. I talk about this a lot, but I would start with like an 8% dock on Keenan Allen in lineups where I have captain Austin Eckler. I would run it through Solver, see how much I'm getting in those lineups, getting those two together in lineups, and then I would kind of play with it from there. If I feel like I need to dock it more, jump up to 12, 16%, and then kind of play around with it a little bit. But I don't think it would be a massive dock, just kind of something to try and limit it from happening too often.
As usual, you're able to break that down in a much more eloquent fashion than I would be able to. But yeah, I think the price stuff matters a lot. And, just every, individual matchup stuff matters too, right? It's like, I believe in Hall and Wilson's matchup in this particular spot as well, plus the salary, not worried about them eating into each other's ceilings from a salary perspective as much, where you need the absolute nuts out of Eckler or Keenan, especially in the captain spot. And we know, at least from Keenan's side, when Eckler's out there catching 8, 9, 10 balls, his ceiling is capped. We can go look at the history and see that. Still has a very nice floor, but ultimate ceiling, like 30 plus point ceiling, not nearly as usual when Eckler's on the field. Okay. I think that was a good breakdown. Any interest in the RB2, RB3s here? I have one name that probably is the most interesting to me, and that's Michael Carter, because he's stone min at 200, and I think he becomes interesting leverage off Hall in non-Hall lineups, and he's still taking a decent amount of work there. For me, Dalvin Cook, Joshua Kelly, not as interested. Personally, curious on your thoughts though.
Yeah, I think you can completely cross off Dalvin Cook. Like he would have to just run insanely pure on like touchdown variance in order to get there. He's handled 21%, 16%, and 11% of the team's rushing attempts over the last 3 weeks, like just getting completely phased out of the offense, not playing on long down and distance, not playing on 2-minute snaps. Maybe he gets one carry inside the 5 for whatever reason if Brees busts a big one. And you just can't play for those type of things to happen. I agree with you on Michael Carter. Maybe they start to give a little bit more to Brees, but they haven't really shown that. So I don't know why we would expect it. He's still playing on 78% of long down and distance snaps, 72% of 2-minute snaps. He's going to get that obvious pass game work, which I think still makes sense. He hasn't really shown it from a PPR upside perspective, but like 4, 5, 6 points could be enough if all of the other expensive guys smash. And then I do have a little bit of interest in Joshua Kelly. I would prefer to see the ownership come down a little bit, but I think because of where Quentin Johnston is priced, because of some of these really cheap min priced options on both sides, Michael Carter being another one of them, there's a few other receivers that are close to min price. I think that Josh Kelly might get overlooked a little bit in lineups where I want to go 4-2, 5-1. I think Josh Kelly makes sense in those builds. He's 2,600. He's going to get some work between the 20s. He's going to get a few pass down opportunities. I don't think there's a massive ceiling there, but I think he could pay off 2,600. And, if you get single digit ownership, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, we saw him break off a long touchdown run on primetime a couple weeks ago. So, you never know. I don't disagree with that on Kelly for sure, especially at low ownership. I think that's fine. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go over to receivers. I think that was a good breakdown on running backs. I'll split this one up by team. Let's start on the Charger side. Interesting stuff here. Josh Palmer, not only out, but put on IR. So he's going to be out for at least 4 weeks. Obviously, they're down Mike Williams for the season, almost at a point here where they're forced into, by hook or by crook, they're forced into finally playing their first round rookie pretty much every snap in Quentin Johnston. So We talked a lot about Keenan, and we'll take any other thoughts you have on Keenan here, but more curious about the down depth charts, guys, starting with Johnston here for you.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to add on Keenan. I will say that, yes, I don't overreact too frequently to wide receiver cornerback matchup stuff. I legitimately respect the Jets secondary and what they've done against opposing receivers. They faced a lot of good ones. They've held a lot of good receivers to, single digit DraftKings points, sub 15 DraftKings points. I think just given talent, given opportunity, given the fact that Josh Palmer and Mike Williams will be out, I still like Keenan. You're not going to see me dogging Keenan at all. I said I prefer Eckler, and I do, but I want to have some exposure to Keenan tonight. He's going to still be able to avoid DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner. Those guys don't travel into the slot much, if at all. And I think the best way to attack, if not through the running back position, the best way to attack this defense through the air is in the slot against Michael Carter, who is still very good in his own right. But I think this is still a relatively okay situation for Keenan Allen. Quentin Johnson, though. Quentin Johnson is kind of the discussion point on the slate. You're seeing 32.4% projected ownership. DraftKings wasn't expecting Joshua Palmer to be out, so they were pricing Quentin Johnston for what he has done to this point of the season. And frankly, if Joshua Palmer was in, $3,600 might be even too expensive for the first round rookie receiver. However, with Josh Palmer out, with Mike Williams, of course, still out, this is a spot where you almost just have to bite the bullet and say, okay, I know Sauce Gardner is elite. I know DJ Reed is elite. They have shut down much better perimeter wide receivers than Quentin Johnston. But like you said, the Chargers don't have any other choice but to throw him out there for 90, 95, 100% of the team's routes. And look, man, if you're out there that frequently, you're going to run into some targets. And this is going to be a spot where I think you could see 5, 6, 7, 8 upwards of double-digit targets for Quentin Johnston just because there's no one else out there. And yeah, I think as a result, he is a very, very viable cash game option. Probably should start there after getting your expensive guys in and seeing what you can do. And I think in tournaments it is still okay at 32.4%. In some of the smaller field stuff where maybe he gets played a little bit more frequently than that, I would try and steer clear because I still think there are some bad scores in his range of outcomes, but there's just not enough competition here to get me off Quentin Johnston tonight, despite all the negatives that we've seen through week 8.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair take. I think perhaps the more interesting conversation is the other options here, and it's definitely worth noting. Chargers are expected to get veteran Jalen Guyton back tonight, guy that's been on their team for a handful of years and has run mostly as that wide receiver 3 for a bunch of years, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. I would expect him to play tonight, except he's not on the DraftKings slate, which, impacts things quite a bit. So that leaves us with Simi Fehoko and Darius Davis as, in Davis's case, Stoneman option, in Fajoko's case, close there at 600. How would you break down these two guys, and who would you say is more at risk of losing work to Guyton if he kind of gets a full complement of snaps back?
Yeah, I think it's possible that maybe Quentin Johnston just plays like 80, 85%, maybe 90% is like a ceiling, running around on 80 to 90% of the team's dropbacks. And then you see Fehoko still around 25, 30, 35%. Darius Davis is the guy who I don't think changes a ton. He's been more of a gadgety type guy. He's only running a route on 10% of the team's dropbacks. But when he's out there, they're trying to scheme him into touches. He's got a 30% targets per route run rate and a 62.5% design target share. Basically when he's going out there, they're trying to get these wide receiver screens, these kind of end arounds, handoff, things like that, just in order to get the ball in his hands. He's a 4.36 guy, 5th round rookie. So I don't know that his role changes all that much. You're seeing pretty massive ownership. Maybe us and the rest of the industry is just a little bit more excited for his potential to become a more traditional wide receiver than maybe is actually going to happen. But I think 3 wide receiver sets are going to be Jalen Guyton, Quentin Johnston on perimeter, and then Keenan Allen still maintaining his slot role. Simi Fehoko will mix in 25, 30, 35% of the team's routes, probably somewhere pretty comfortable for him. But there's a wide range of outcomes here. And I think that playing away from ownership is the best way to handle this situation. So you're telling me I get Simi Fehoko at 3% projected ownership right now versus Darius Davis at 15%. I think that's a very obvious spot to just trust that Simi Fehoko is more of a traditional wide receiver, is going to see a few more opportunities, and the role for Darius Davis just isn't going to change that much.
Yeah, I agree with you on Fehoko. You might as well take that ownership leverage. I do think that that $400 ends up mattering when you kind of try to squeeze in a bunch of studs. I was playing around with the instruction just a little bit. So I think that, you know, you're kind of going to have to force in Fehoko there, depending on the kind of build you're making. But, you know, I like that at only 400 more with much less ownership, for sure. And he's a veteran. I think that they trust out there to run some routes too. Okay, let's go to the Jet side. Also have had a pretty lengthy conversation on Garrett Wilson. This is a guy that 9.6, so you got him at under 5 figures, has been absolute elite role. You know, Zach Wilson in the right matchups at least shown that he can get him the ball. Even last week in that disgusting Giants Jets game, he had his 7 for 100 on 13 targets or something. Due for some positive touchdown regression. Only 11% captain ownership, under 50% total ownership. This just looks like a smash to me.
It looks like a smash. It feels like a smash. You know, generally my read on these things tends to align a little bit more with the field than I would like. We're seeing 11% right now. Given the fact that he's under that 5-figure number, might be a little bit of a psychological boost for the field to try to get to more Garrett Wilson. I hope that because Breece Hall looks attractive, that because Keenan Allen gets the slot, and that because Austin Eckler is in a great spot, that this ownership kind of stays in check. But I do worry about it inflating some, you know, maybe up to 13, 14%. Still, if it's there, I love it. You mentioned the elite role, you know, one of the league's best roles, if you kind of ignore the offense that he's playing in. 35.5 or 33.5% target share, 48.9% air yard share, 57.9% red zone target share. I mean, come on. There's a massive receiving line coming for Garrett Wilson. I hope it's tonight. It's going to be soon. I would much rather be a week early and take a bad game from Garrett Wilson than not play him and be a week late if he goes off tonight. I absolutely love him. He's probably my favorite overall captain play on the entire slate. So this could be one of those Gary spots where, you know, 50% total ownership feels right. Maybe I come in a little bit under flex, but I try to get like 2x or something like that at captain, and come in with like 20% captain ownership across my lineups on Garrett Wilson. This feels like a phenomenal spot, and I think he's very live to be the optimal captain tonight.
Totally. Worth noting on weather too, just like for Wilson's ability to push the ball downfield if they're taking shots. It's pretty nice here tonight. It's like 50 degrees ish, maybe a little bit under, and like very little wind. So it should be no issues there, which is good for these guys. I'll say this, man. After Wilson, it's pretty ugly here on the Jets receiver front. I'm not really into Allen Lazard at that 5.2 tag. That's usually that like dead man's land receiver type price on these types of slates with like not much production to show for it. And, you know, a little bit too pricey for my liking. And then you got, you know, Cobb at 200 who are expecting to come back tonight. I know some people in chat were talking about playing some Randall Cobb in flex as a potential, I guess, you know, one of your other 200 options. And maybe at the end we'll rank these under 1K options, but he's another guy there for you. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's really Garrett Wilson that I'm interested in here. I'm not going to completely ignore these other dudes, but if I have to take Jets pass catchers, I think I'm more interested on the tight end front when we get there.
Yeah, I'm with you. We can get to tight end. It's just like a major shrug here. 5,200 is probably, you know, 1K too expensive for what we're expecting from Allen Lazard. If he was like 4,200 or 4K, maybe a little bit more interesting, but not a massive target share. He is getting targeted deep downfield, so maybe he could pay off in that manner. But I think this is kind of a touchdown or bust dart throw. And if you're telling me he's coming through at 24 or 25% ownership, it doesn't feel like a dart throw I'm willing to accept. Randall Cobb's going to come back to this slot role, but this role has been bad, man. And Randall Cobb feels like he has just no interest in playing. That's probably not a fair assessment, but 7.1% target share, 6.8% air yard share. I mean, I understand he's 200, and if all these other expensive guys go off, and the rest of these cheap guys fail, absolutely, Randall Cobb could find his way into a winning lineup. But man, I mean, he's gonna have to catch like 5-6 balls because he's just not doing anything after the catch, and he's not being targeted deep enough downfield. I suppose at sub 10%, it's worth keeping in our MME player pool, but nothing I'm super excited about here. I do agree with you that the more interesting side of things would be the tight end position for the Jets.
Yeah. And you know, Cobb's like the kind of play that on a main slate, if he was thrown in at 3K, like I wouldn't include him because I don't think there's a ceiling there that you need those raw points. But on a showdown slate, like if he gets 4 for 40 or something, that could very well be optimal. So I understand it. Not my favorite play, but I get it. All right, let's talk tight ends. I'll stay on the Jets side here. It's definitely Tyler Conklin who runs the show for the Jets tight ends. And I think he's an interesting play. 3K. So that's salary saving in its own right. If you do want to get into Zach Wilson captain lineups, I would like kind of like doubles with Garrett Wilson, and Tyler Conklin would kind of be my favorite way to attack that. But, everything here seemed pretty good. 22% total ownership. I'm curious if you would ever sprinkle him into captain, but overall it looks like a solid play.
Yeah, I don't think I have any interest at captain here. I still think there's kind of a limited ceiling, and I just don't feel like we need that premium salary relief to get there. I think we're good enough with the expensive options we've discussed, and I have to worry about Conklin at captain. But looks like a really strong flex play. And if somebody that you're thinking about like a 1v1 in cash game contest, and you don't trust the Quentin Johnston stuff, or feel like the Jets secondary is gonna limit his production, I think Conklin is a fine kind of direct price point pivot, even in cash game contests. It's got a 14.3% target share, 13.8% air yard share. Matchup against the Chargers, who are allowing the league's 12th highest target share to his position, feels like a pretty good spot for him. I still think there's a fairly limited ceiling, but I mean, we saw it last night, even in a game that featured a ton of offensive production. Drew Sample was optimal. I know it was a different price tag. Drew Sample was optimal at scoring 12 points. Tanner Hudson scored 8.5 and was kind of close to winning lineups as well. Like if you get 9, 10, 11, 12 points from these guys, it could ultimately be enough. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at from Tyler Conklin. So if you told me I got 10, 11, 12, I'd probably sign up for that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Any interest in CJ Uzoma or Jeremy Ruckert? They're both 200. I mean, we can put them in our 200 bucket that we've seen a bunch of players at so far. Usually I throw these guys in my player pool on Showdown. I think I'm still more interested in Uzoma as a little bit of a higher ceiling player.
Yeah, agreed. I like Uzoma. Not too worried about the difference in ownership there. It's amazing how many like sub 1K options there are in the slate, and I think that's gonna force that roster construction to really go that way. Where the guys like Allen Lazard, maybe they do get pushed down to a point where they actually profile as pretty attractive options if they're low owned enough. And I really think you're going to see jam in as many studs as possible, and then try to find your punt du jour after going to somebody like Tyler Conklin or Quentin Johnston for like your 5th spot. And then it's going to be all of these guys kind of just randomly littered throughout the rest of lineups for that final flex position. Jeremy Ruckert and CJ Uzomah are probably closer to the bottom of that list than the top, but still names that I think should be part of our MME player pool.
Yes, I agree with that. Charger side, I think it's pretty interesting from a tight end perspective because Gerald Everett is back this week, and it's definitely been a split between him and Parham this year, way more than we've seen in previous years. But I think something that's kind of going underreported, or at least underspoken about here, with no Joshua Palmer, with no Mike Williams, both big targets. And like, I'm curious if, especially depending on how much they trust or don't trust Quentin Johnston, or particularly in this matchup with Johnson drawing those tough corners, curious if these guys' target shares are kind of boosted up tonight. So I'm interested in both these guys. Everett is kind of in that Lazard salary range, but I think that you can paint a better picture for Everett tonight than you can Allen Lazard, despite the matchup being better for Lazard. And then Parham, obviously, we not much to say about Donald Parham on this site. We all love Donald Parham, pops off in the PSM for sure. So how are you handling these two tight ends? I think they're both interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. The Gerald Everett thing is interesting because he's 5,600 and it does feel a little bit too expensive. It's been a pretty bad role for him, to be quite frank. 11.1% target share, 4.4% air yard share on a 4.4 yard ADOT. I think the last time we had the Chargers on a Showdown slate where we did a show, I referred to him as kind of a catch and fall tight end. Catch and fall down tight end, and he ended up being in the optimal lineup, I believe. So hopefully I'm not eating my words again. I just feel like he's a little bit too expensive here, and I get it. I think they could definitely play more 12 personnel. They could definitely use Gerald Everett a little bit more out wide, I think, but I still think they're going to default back to traditional 11 personnel. I think they feel pretty good about Jalen Guyton. If they're not going to play their first round rookie now, I don't know when they would. So I still think they're going to default to kind of traditional 11 personnel through wide receiver sets. And you're going to see a pretty similar rotation between him, that being Gerald Everett, and Donald Parham. And the matchup on paper looks okay against the Jets, but they are allowing the league's 5th highest DraftKings points per game to Everett's position, but they faced a ton of good tight ends. They faced obviously Travis Kelce, and they're also allowing They're just allowing more touchdowns in that department. They're not giving up higher target share. They're not giving up more total targets. It really just comes down to some touchdown variance. So I don't think this is necessarily as good of a matchup as maybe on paper would indicate. So not super obsessed with Gerald Everett. I think 20% ownership still feels a little bit high on him, and Parham being 3,200 is a little bit more interesting. I think he profiles as another price point pivot away from Quentin Johnston. If that Quentin Johnston ownership is going to get inflated, I think my preference would be to attack it with somebody like Parham as opposed to spending up to somebody like Gerald Everett.
I totally agree there. I like the Parham pivot to Quentin Johnston for sure. Okay, I think that covers it from a skill position perspective. We'll talk defense and kickers, and we'll take a couple questions if we have some time. I see a bunch of good questions out there. All right, Cody, let's start with DSTs here. Definitely interested in the Jets personally. 800 less than the Chargers. They're at home. We know that they can wreak some havoc. Herbert is a gunslinger, prone to interceptions for sure. And you're looking at less ownership. So I get the desire and projection on the Chargers defense and, a lot more ownership there. The Jets still having a bunch of offensive line issues. We're still talking about Zach Wilson. But to me, I'm interested in the much more talented defense in the Jets for a lower price personally tonight.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like the Chargers kind of fall in no man's land on this slate from the fact that like I don't know where you can play them. If they're going to be 30.8% owned in tournaments, I think that's too high. And I just don't feel like cash game roster constructions necessarily need them at 5K. Although I did write them up as value. I still think they're a decent value. And if you need somewhere to go in that range in cash game rosters, I think they're okay. Like you mentioned, this is Zach Wilson still. This is a Jets offensive line that has struggled a bunch. I still think the Chargers can generate pressure. So I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it in those contests. I would prefer not to go there at 30.8% in tournaments unless it's in like a 5-1 where I'm really just expecting a Chargers onslaught. I think it's a little bit more interesting. I am with you, however, though, on the Jets, and your comment from the front of the show is coming back. Like if the Chargers are going to charge her in this spot, it feels like that partially is going to come down to like a Justin Herbert interception. Maybe that's a pick six. Maybe it's a strip sack, something along those lines. But I think at 4,200, where they offer leverage from those cheap skill position players, 18.5% projected ownership, I do feel like the Jets, specifically in Jets heavy lineups, the Jets defense is really interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Kickers still priced up a bit, not as high as we've seen in recent weeks. I know we saw a bunch of guys getting over that 5K mark in recent weeks, but 4.6 for Dicker the kicker and 44 for Greg the leg seems fine. I don't know. I don't really have many takes here. How are you? What do you feel about the kickers tonight?
Yeah, I feel the same way as you when I look at them. Like, that feels okay. I'm glad they're back down below 5K. They become more playable. We saw like 5,400, 5,200 for some of these guys, and we're seeing ownership come in at like 10, 11, 12%, which we've rarely seen before. And I haven't been able to run it recently. I need to kind of review the last couple of weeks of Showdown slates just to get an idea of like if the pricing's actually changing things, and it's still probably too small sample to really draw any conclusions. But over the last like 2+ years worth of primetime Showdown contests, they've been in the top 1% winning lineups at like a 40% clip. So, partially because kickers have outperformed their projection in primetime slates, partially because they continuously find top 1% winning lineups. I think that's why DraftKings had raised the price tags on them. Coming back down a little bit in this game with a 39, 40 point total, I think makes sense. And yeah, it's just kind of a lukewarm take on them. They fit in, but I don't necessarily see myself going out of my way to try and force them into lineups.
Yeah, I can make a case. I think there's a bull case on both these guys. Like we talked about our argument that we went back and forth with all last year, like these offenses that stall out. I could really see both these offenses being stall out at the 25-30 tonight, like a lot, between the Jets' just lack of firepower from the quarterback and offensive line position, and then the Chargers facing a really tough defense and, showing a propensity to always underachieve. I could just really see it. So wouldn't be surprised. Again, no data behind that type of take. This is purely, I know ball take. So yeah, I mean, the hard part is who you're putting them up against, right? We always should look at who is around them in salary. So you have both defenses, and then they're both more expensive than Johnston and Parham and Conklin. which makes them harder clicks in that sense. But I do kind of like kickers more than I normally do, I think, tonight. Especially, I already mentioned the weather looks pretty good tonight in the Meadowlands, which can get quite windy in the fall and winter. It looks like tonight will not be that way. All right, Cody, let's take. Yeah, go ahead.
Kickers on these teams that don't have finishers, and that's like such a general term, and it's like saying a player has or doesn't have the clutch gene or something like that. It's kind of a ridiculous statement to make. But like we go back to the Eagles because we had that Jake Elliott discussion last season, and like these teams that have finishers, AJ Brown is an alpha, Jalen Hurts with the tush push, DeAndre Swift can get in the box. Like the Jets and Chargers don't necessarily have those types of guys. You know, same thing with the 49ers where they have Christian McCaffrey who's going to find the end zone, George Kittle who has a knack for finding the end zone, Deebo Samuel, obviously. You know, like when I look at these two offenses, I feel them moving the ball fairly well between the 20s and then, like you said, stalling out because they just can't finish drives against good opposing defenses or because they struggle themselves offensively. So I do agree with that sentiment that like the kickers look better in those spots where you could see a bunch of field goals getting racked up.
Yeah, totally. Got about 5 minutes for questions, Cody, or 3 or 4 before we get into flag plants. Let me go back to earlier. I mean, Noah was talking about how we kind of parsed through the 1K punts for tonight's games. I think we did a good job talking about all the options, but do you have an order or a favorite of, I guess, everyone from Fehoko down, which includes Fehoko, and then all those $200 guys?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you have to factor in ownership, I think, in order to rank these guys. And I think if I'm doing that and factoring in ownership, my favorite would be Simi Fehoko. I think that maybe the field, maybe us, maybe the industry is just under projecting how involved he may be as a more traditional perimeter wide receiver. And if he's going to come in at 3% owned, I think there's more than a 3% chance, you know, however you want to parse this out to make him a good play. I think there's more than a 3% chance that he ends up being like the wide receiver 3B in this offense for tonight with Josh Palmer and Big Mike still out. So I think you're getting paid off with a nice ownership discount there. So I do like Fehoko. I still think there's a good chance that Darius Davis sees his role increase, but I don't think it's a given. I think he could still be used as a gadget guy, which has yielded okay results for a guy that's minimum price. So I do like Darius Davis as well. And then Michael Carter was the other guy who I know you like as well. If the Jets do fall behind, and really even if they don't, Michael Carter is being used enough as a pass catcher against a Chargers defense that's giving up a lot of targets to opposing running backs that I like Michael Carter at $200 as well.
Joseph asked way earlier about rules. I think you'll save that for Discord and helping out the subscribers behind the paywall. But I think kind of talking about the way things will be duped, how to jam in studs on this slate, something we've been talking about quite a bit. We haven't spoken about it that much on this slate because I think the ceiling case on some of these studs tonight is too appetizing. But would you be interested in a Quentin Johnston type captain and then, you know, jam in whatever kind of studs that you can? He's particularly asking for small field, but any kind of thoughts on that type of construction tonight?
Yeah, it's tough because you get $3,600 at captain plus the 1.5x salary multiplier, and that really allows you to do kind of whatever you want. That build probably lends itself to Justin Herbert in the flex, probably lends itself to one of Eckler or Keenan in the flex as well, and then you probably go back to the other side with Brees or Garrett Wilson. So you're looking at like a lot of 2v2s off of a lot of similar roster constructions. So even if you're saying Quentin Johnston is 5% owned, think about that across 10,000 lineups, right? 5% of 10,000 lineups, you're still gonna have Quentin Johnston and then those same 4 players in their first 4 flex spots. So it's really tough to get different in large field. I think in small field, it's a little bit more viable when like 5% of 100 lineups is still only 5 lineups that you're competing against. So it's more viable to do that type of thing in small field. You also don't need the absolute stone nuts in small field to win. We saw some winners last night that didn't have the optimal lineup in small field. So yes, a little bit more acceptable to go QJ plus 4 studs in small field, but still be careful about it because you could run into a ton of dupes if you're not being mindful about who you're playing in your final flex spot, or if you're just jamming the 4 studs and playing a $200 owned guy or $200 priced guy, you could end up looking at a lot of very similar lineups.
Okay, last question, and then we'll get to flag plants. We talked a lot about potentially fading quarterbacks and maybe not being as interested in them in captain, and particularly you talked about Wilson maybe not being a cash game priority for you. Edwin was asking, would you be comfortable fading quarterbacks in GPPs, particularly tonight? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's okay. Usually quarterbacks are just, I mean, it's kind of intuitive. Quarterbacks are touching the ball on every play. So if you're getting good games from the skill position players, usually that means the quarterbacks are going to find their way into winning lineups just because of raw points alone. But I think specifically on this slate, given the price tags on both guys and given how condensed both of these offenses could ultimately be, I would be okay not playing Herbert. I would be okay with lineups that don't have Herbert or Wilson, Zach Wilson, that is, in GPPs, even though I generally play with at least one quarterback in flex.
Yeah, I still think it's a little bit risky. I think most of my lineups I'd want at least one quarterback in flex tonight, but I do get the argument tonight where maybe more than normal, I'd be okay with a sprinkle of my portfolio having 0, but I would want more often than not, I would want to have at least one of the quarterbacks. Okay, we're ready at the 45-minute mark. Cody, go ahead. Who you liking for Flacco? I think I know what direction you're going in, but go ahead.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it because I know what's going to happen to ownership, and it does feel pretty obvious in hindsight. So I think if I'm making any final adjustments to ownership here before lock, I probably need to come up on this guy's captain ownership. I'm going to do it anyway because I feel like the spot is so damn good right now for Garrett Wilson. And I think that there is some type of 25 to 30 point DraftKings output, as I wrote in the article, in his immediate future. If it's not tonight, it's going to happen soon because the role's too sick. The spot is too good. The talent is too good for him to keep, scoring less than 20 DraftKings points in each outing. And Zach Wilson has been much more competent than maybe we would have thought when Aaron Rodgers initially went down. I think Zach Wilson has played fine. I think this is a good spot against the Chargers defense that is inviting opposing quarterbacks to throw against them. 34% target share, 49% air yard share, 58% red zone target share. We talk about these types of games frequently in the Showdown breakdown. If you gave me 10, 101 for Garrett Wilson for his receiving line tonight, I think that's definitely within his range of outcomes with his usage profile. And feels obvious. It feels obvious, but I still think 11, 12, 13, 14% projected ownership at captain is too low for him. I think I'm going to try to come in overweight that significantly in small and large field GPPs. I love the Jets wide receiver 1 tonight.
Yes, he would have been mine as well. And I think he's ultimately my favorite play on the slate. And that's scary because, like, if we're both thinking it, I know some of chat's thinking it, like, there's some steam coming there probably. Yeah. However, I was going to go with whichever one you didn't. And I think one of Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson is going to be the optimal captain tonight. And I have no issues. I already mentioned, especially when you take into account price on the Eckler-Keenan front with the negative correlation there, I have no issues playing a Wilson captain with Hall or a Hall captain with Wilson. This is a team in the Chargers that we have essentially just given up the run for years. They just don't care that much about stopping the run. And this is a guy, Breece, that, obviously is an excellent pass catcher, is starting to gain that explosiveness back. 12% captain seems really good to me on Breece, only 53% total ownership. I want at least one of Wilson or Hall in every single lineup, and I think I want both of them in many lineups because I already mentioned I kind of want to play this more Jets heavy personally tonight. So I like Wilson better, but I love Breece Hall almost as much. So I'm going to go with Breece Hall. So there you go. We did it again. 2 elite offensive players from the same team, and the Jets are going to score like 6 points tonight. So there you go.
You have the sim analysis up on your tab. We're going to reserve that for on your open tabs. We're going to reserve that for putting that up. Premium subscribers. It's been an extremely useful tool, and I've been writing these Showdown breakdowns for 3+ years now. I've gotten more positive feedback in the first couple of weeks of us posting these Showdown sim articles than I have in 3 years of writing the Showdown breakdown. So that makes me feel really good about my writing skills. But all jokes aside, the Showdown sim analysis is extremely valuable. I will give away one piece of free information for the people to try and entice them to go check it out. We have 12.1% projected ownership at captain for Breece Hall. He's appearing in 17.1% of our top optimal lineups. I think if you feel like steam is coming on Garrett Wilson, it can't be coming on both of them, right? And if it is, it's gonna come in lower on Eckler and Keenan. I feel like one of these guys is going to come in close to where we're projecting. If that's Breece, I think he profiles as a phenomenal large field GPP play as well. So I love the Jets side. I hope you're wrong that they don't score 6 points. Please, Zach Wilson, please.
I'm just setting myself up for disappointment. I feel like every time we flag plant from the same team, especially two like super high ceiling guys, we just fall flat on our faces. But hey, tonight bucks that trend. All right, yeah, it's Breece Hall's world. We're just living in it, and very excited, weirdly excited for this one. I think it's going to be fun. I'll be flipping back and forth between my Knicks and Clippers as James Harden makes his Clipper debut. If you're interested in NBA DFS, please do go check out everything we have going on at Established to Run NBA product. I can guarantee you, as someone that's been a part of this team for 3-4 years now, we are by far the best in the business at everything we're breaking down, both from a DFS and prop side. Obviously, Gallagher's matchup column, everything there. Can't recommend it enough. Would highly recommend a subscription over there if you're interested. Even if you're not a huge DFS player, the value you get out of Gallagher's matchups column is just, I know there are a lot of people that don't play DFS that subscribe just for that. So there's my NBA plug for you. We will be back on Thursday, which I think it's a super ugly game, Cody. I think it's like, we might just want to like say, I don't know. I mean, we got to do it because it's a Thursday. We're gonna do it, but it's Panthers at Bears. I mean, this is really bad. It's really, really bad. So we'll be back for that one. All right. I know you guys are all excited for that. No, seriously, good luck tonight. Enjoy it. Glad we're back with you, and we will see you all on Thursday. Take care, everybody.